All right, so I just want to welcome everybody to this event, Digitised and Datafied Animals, Emerging Technologies and Human-Animal Entanglements. And thanks to all, we've got a whole heap of fabulous presentations here. But before we get started, it's not got there. I just want to acknowledge the country on which I'm living and working. So I'm coming to you from the Wurundjeri country here in Melbourne, Naarm, and I want to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and acknowledge elders past and present, and particularly pay my respect to any Indigenous people who are with us today. And I'm going to hand over to Deborah now to chair the first half of this session. Did you want me to stop the share, Deborah?
Yes, thanks, Christine. Thank you. Thanks, Christine. I'm Deborah Lupton. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land, the Eora Nation here at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, where it's a lovely, drizzly but warmish spring day today. And I have some lovely flora to look out at through my window, but not many animals right now, actually. Maybe a few birds will come along. So the reason for this event is that Christine and myself are part of the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society. And one area that we feel we'd really like to move towards with the Centre of Excellence is looking at how digital technologies affect more than human worlds and living creatures. So one example, of course, of this approach is animals, but I'm personally also interested in the flora with which we engage, and I think we'll be moving towards some events perhaps that'll focus more on plants as well as on animals that we're talking about today. But that's something that we'd really like together. Christine has a legal background. I have a sociology and cultural and media studies background, that we'd really like to start moving and getting going more in the Centre of Excellence and getting away from that human-centric approach, which does tend to dog a lot of digital sociology or legal analysis or media studies analysis of digital media and devices. So hence the reason for today's event. So we do have a wonderful selection of presenters, and some of whom are here in Australia, others of whom are in the Northern Hemisphere and are very kindly joining us in a challenging time zone for them. We do have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 talks in the first half of the session, then we'll have a break and then we'll have the remaining other 4 talks after our break. Each person will have 15 minutes to speak and a 5-minute Q&A time, so 20 minutes in all for their slot. So I will be keeping time for this first half and introducing people, and Christine will be doing that in the second half. So first up, I would like to introduce Emily Wandra, who's from the University of Pittsburgh. Emily, would you like to see if you can share your screen now, please? That's great. And I will get my timer happening on my device, which helps me. And if you haven't, all the presenters, just a heads up, if you haven't finished after your 15 minutes, I'll just sort of give a shout out to say time's up or something like that, just to let you know, because I know it's really hard to keep when you're talking, to keep an eye on the time. So, but please go ahead, Emily, and welcome and thank you for your wonderful talk called AI of the Tiger.
All right. Thank you so much to Christine and Deborah for organizing. So my talk is AI of the Tiger, Computer Vision and Wildlife Research. One afternoon this past August, in the gleaming Chen Neuroscience Building at Caltech, a group of people could be found working intensely, either individually or huddled in groups over laptop computers. This group was part of a cohort of 18 ecologists and conservationists who had come to Caltech for the first summer school for computer vision for ecology. Each was working on a problem in ecological research that they were hoping to solve through the use of computer vision. The afternoon was a period of work time after a morning spent attending lectures on how to use AI to analyze photos of animals taken in the wild, more specifically, how to use AI to generate a three-dimensional model of an animal from a photograph, and on how to manage and use data, how to split data into test and train sets, and how to avoid a scary sounding condition known as data poisoning. In the seminar room, the mood was one of quiet intensity as people worked to get up to speed on new coding languages, wrestling with Python, wrangling unruly data sets, negotiating cloud computing, and attempting to train artificial neural networks. Occasionally, someone would head to the back of the room to grab a snack or raise a hand and call for attention, saying, "Sarah, could you take a look at this when you get a chance?" Sarah was Sarah Beery, the intellectual force behind the summer school. A recent graduate of the Computing and Mathematical Sciences PhD program at Caltech, she had planned the school, designing the curriculum, selecting the students, assembling a team of machine learning and computer vision experts to help teach it, and getting funding to pay for all of it. Her goal was to democratize access to machine learning and to empower ecologists to build their own computer vision tools. So drawing on fieldwork at the summer school, I'm going to talk today about how ecologists develop and use computer vision tools to understand wildlife. I'll describe what they learned about what AI could do for them, and they found that it was definitely not magic and a far cry from what AI hype might have people believe. And I'm going to contrast the roles of data sets in computer science and ecological research, and suggest what computer science might learn from ecologists. Okay, so why were these ecologists taking time away from fieldwork and setting aside their hard-won expertise in R, the standard programming language ecologists use for data analysis, to learn new programming languages and data analysis techniques? Machine learning and artificial neural networks have been held up as a potential solution to the tremendous growth of, in data available about wildlife. So over the past 20 or so years, scientists have developed an ever-expanding internet of animals, which Deborah and others will be talking more about later today. So briefly, for ecologists, this internet of animals is composed of biologging and tracking tools like GPS tags, camera traps, and bioacoustic monitors. These tools have transformed ecological research, turning previously inaccessible aspects of animal life and behavior into data. So animals, forests, ecosystems have been datafied. Okay. But now scientists must develop new ways to analyze this avalanche of data to turn it into something. So in order to make use of the photos, video, and audio data emerging from camera traps and monitoring systems, ecologists have turned to machine learning techniques, including computer vision. Computer vision is, in very technical terms, a form of image-based computer science that uses pixel values to infer image content. The atomic unit of data in computer vision is an image pixel that represents color in the visible spectrum. Pixels are arranged into groups such that pixel, proximity, orientation, and similarity create a group identity. More colloquially, it is a subset of artificial intelligence focusing on the analysis and identification of images, the use of an algorithm to predict the content of an image. So the goal of the summer school was for ecologists to develop computer vision algorithms that would analyze both visual and acoustic environmental data. Despite the prevalence of AI hype, the work that AI and computer vision can do for ecology is very specific and constrained. And this was reinforced throughout the course as the instructors delineated the kinds of problems that computer vision might be useful for, reminding students frequently of its limitations. AI could not do tasks that people couldn't do. So for example, if a scientist can't identify the species or individual animal from a picture, AI can't either. Nor could AI make decisions. What AI could do was speed up tasks that humans found repetitive or boring, generally around data processing. So for example, AI can dramatically accelerate image processing from camera traps by sorting images into those which have non-human animals in them and those which don't. So one guest lecturer from Google explained, quote, "We want to use AI to help conservation practitioners spend their time on the interesting part and relegate the boring part to computers." The course also reinforced the idea that AI is not going to radically transform ecological labor. So in a lecture a few days later, an ecologist argued forcefully for the continued importance of field researchers and field work. He said, quote, "We're not trying to replace anyone. Everyone, when people say AI is coming for your job, stop them. Say, no, that's not what we're doing. No one wants that. The fear that, quote, we're coming for field ecology is farcical, not the goal. We need to move beyond that paradigm." So he went on to explain, instead, ecological and conservation research will continue to need field researchers, natural historians, curators, statisticians, and data scientists working together to produce knowledge. So at the moment, this is what AI can do for ecology. It can speed up data analysis by limiting the number of images scientists have to look at. Or it can, in the words of one of my interlocutors, narrow the hypothesis space. So it might not, for example, be able to tell you the exact identity of the Iberian lynx in an image, but it could narrow it down to 5 potential lynxes, making it easier for the human researcher to make their determination about the animal's identity. Okay, so I'd like to suggest that while AI can be useful for ecology, as I've just described, and as practitioners at the summer school learned, but perhaps just as importantly, machine learning practitioners and computer scientists have a great deal to learn from ecologists, particularly in the way data sets are used and understood. So machine learning and computer vision algorithms have, of course, come in for really substantial social science critique when they are applied to human lives. Researchers have demonstrated really thoroughly how cultural categories are built into these technologies. More specifically, machine learning algorithms have been shown to discriminate on categories like race and gender, reflecting and reinforcing the power dynamics of the cultures in which they're constructed. And the discrimination, harm, and failures of these systems emerge from a variety of points. People have highlighted data sets on which algorithms are trained as one key source of harm, generated by the under or misrepresentation of various groups in the data. Data sets have played a hugely important role in the development of machine learning. So for a long time, computer vision did not work. And it was only after the production of standardized data sets on which algorithms and techniques could be trained, tested, and compared did it become possible to make effective computer vision. There are a variety of benchmark data sets that have been and are being used. So in a couple of examples, MNIST, a database of 70,000 handwritten digits, CFAR, a data set of 60,000 32 by 32 pixel color images, COCO, the Common Objects in Context data set of 330,000 images. And lastly, possibly the most widely known and used data set is Imagenet. Produced by computer scientist Fei-Fei Li and her team, Imagenet has 14 million annotated images organized into 20,000 categories. And it was produced using keywords derived from the nouns in WordNet, a database of semantic relations between words. These nouns were then used to scrape web search engines for images associated with the concept. These word-image associations were then reviewed by people hired using the Amazon Mechanical Turk crowd worker platform to confirm the presence or absence of the concept from the image. And the goal of Imagenet's producers was to develop a gold standard data set, one that was thoroughly vetted to ensure that the images accurately match the annotation. Okay, so in response to the production of algorithmic harm, people have sought to improve representation within data sets, focusing on fairness and balance and other statistical properties as kind of like targets for things in need of repair. However, in a recent piece in Big Data and Society, critical AI scholar Emily Denton and colleagues argue that this is insufficient because these interventions to improve data sets leave untouched the foundational assumptions that machine learning communities make about them. These data sets are naturalized, they're treated as black boxes and unexamined by their users. So what Denton and colleagues say is needed are not tweaks to data sets, but instead attention to them, quote, both as infrastructural and genealogical objects of inquiry, end quote. So key among the assumption made by machine learning practitioners is that data sets are essentially faithful representations of reality, that there is a straightforward relationship between images and their meanings. And as a result, all human observers are interchangeable. So this belief shaped the labor practices that formed Imagenet. Since anyone could and would associate the same concepts with images, the choice of anonymous M-Turkers, as Amazon Mechanical Turk laborers are called, made sense. And Mary Gray and Siddharth Suri's excellent book, Ghost Work, has a great analysis of how Imagenet was produced and more broadly, the experiences of M-Turk workers and the paradox of how AI and automation often rely on human labor to make them work. Okay, so this construction of data sets as these naturalized objects fails to recognize the subjective nature of meaning formation and how it reflects particular ways of seeing the world. And this extends beyond the production of data sets. Machine learning practitioners who make use of them tend to treat these as natural objects, giving little consideration to their status as human productions, shaped by the standpoints of those who design them, the labor practices that produce them, and the subjects being documented. In addition, a very small number of data sets tend to dominate work in AI. One computer scientist observed to me that, quote, in the computer vision community, we like to keep our lives simple and work with the same data sets and benchmarks, end quote. Okay, so ecology provides both tools to look under the hood of Imagenet and demonstrate that the association of images with labels is not a straightforward task. And it also provides new models for relationships with data. So when expert ecologists recently examined images in Imagenet, they found that a large percentage, 25% of the data set consists of images of wild animals, which is a really interesting finding, reflecting perhaps the degree of interest that people have in wildlife. And they also found that the annotations made by anonymous M-Turkers did not correspond with how expert ecologists would label them. So these ecologists reviewing the images found that 12% were incorrectly labeled, and some classes of animals had over 90% incorrect labels. So far from being a simple or universal task, correct identification of animals is complex, requiring experience and expert knowledge that is generally not held by members of the general public who originally annotated the images. So ecologists can be a check on the assertions of the accuracy of data sets like Imagenet and can offer a critical perspective on the idea that image annotation is straightforward. At the Summer School for Computer Vision, ecologists also offered an alternative way to relate to data sets. So rather than working with benchmark data sets, they were training and testing AI tools on data sets that they themselves had produced. And data for ecologists, at least in this case, was extremely expensive, both in terms of gathering it and annotating it. As a result, the series of practical and theoretical choices that govern the construction of data sets, from the technological construction of the data, kind of like the functions and limitations of the recording devices used, the labor entailed in collecting data, both the physical field work, whether that was trekking through Malagasy mountains with microphones and recording devices, or installing camera traps in Norwegian forests, or going out on a boat in the Pacific to record the sounds of beaked whales, and the laborious process of annotating data, that is analyzing and describing what these traces represented, were all constantly foregrounded because the people who were analyzing the data were generally the same ones who had collected it. This made them acutely aware of its construction as a data set, because it was their own kind of like hard, sometimes painful labor and hard-won expertise that had constructed it. As a result, students at the summer school brought to AI and machine learning a refusal to naturalize data sets and a serious caution about the limitations of algorithms. This meant setting strict parameters on what they understood the data set to represent, and really kind of like refusing to make really broad-based claims about what could be done with it. And further, a very critical eye towards the results that AI might produce. And their relationship with data construction produced AI practitioners who were resistant to hype and were appropriately reluctant to make claims about the power and potential of computer vision. So I just want to conclude by suggesting that while the summer school was intended to give ecologists the skills to use computer vision and to democratize this technology, I think that it may also ultimately be extremely useful for providing important lessons for computer scientists to think about and relate to data sets. And I'll conclude there.
So can I introduce Christine? Christine, would you like to share your slides? And I believe Simon's online, but you're going to be giving the talk because he's got a dodgy internet connection. Is that true, Simon?
It's a bit dodgy, yeah. I'm overseas, so it might fail. So Christine's going to do all the legwork. Thanks, Christine. All
right, and maybe if you wanted to, you could chime in at question time if you wanted to say something. So thanks, Simon. And
is that a batik shirt you're wearing, Simon? Don't
that is yes, it is.
Okay,
yeah, I'm really
that's a clue.
Really getting to the Bali thing over here.
Yeah, I hear you're in Bali, so try not to be jealous.
Okay.
It's very rainy here in Sydney and Melbourne.
Oh, good to hear.
Okay, I'm going to get started. All right, so this is a taster of a paper that Simon and I have written, a very preliminary paper in some ways, seeking to address what we see as a lack of attention to non-human animals in the burgeoning field of AI ethics, and also a lack of attention to AI in critical animal studies. So yeah, probably a nice compliment in some way to what Kendra just said. And by way of background, I'm a socio-legal scholar with a long history researching business regulation and legal ethics. And Simon is a former veterinarian, now a philosopher and digital ethicist. And yeah, I'm going to present and Simon's going to correct whatever I say wrong in the question time. So we're going to give a brief account of what motivates our concern, set out our pragmatic conceptual framework for expanding our thinking about the potential harms of AI to include harm to animals, and provide some illustrations of how it might work to illuminate animal experiences that might otherwise go unexamined. So we're defining AI quite broadly as computers being able to perform tasks that are associated with intelligent beings, human or animal. And so I think actually the sort of things we're interested in have already been really beautifully introduced and illustrated by Emily and Kendra. So we're talking about, you know, the use of big data from the internet, from sensors in the environment and on or in human and animal bodies. And we're talking about modern machine learning, including machine vision, natural language processing and speech recognition. And there are a wide range of ways in which these AI-enabled technologies already incorporate, or we might say entangle, non-human animals into their purview. And these include precision livestock farming, which is what Kendra was just talking about, wildlife conservation monitoring, which is what Emily was talking about, also the Internet of Things in the home, which can include companion animals, various kinds of automated vehicles and robots, including self-driving cars and delivery drones, and also animal-related content online, which I think Deborah will probably be talking about. And we're not talking about generalized AI. So as we know, despite all its promise to do good, it's already increasingly obvious that AI-enabled technologies can harm humans in a variety of ways, ranging from unreliable and inaccurate decisions that particularly affect vulnerable people, such as robo-debt, here in Australia, embedding and amplifying existing biases in the source data, such as racism, amplifying false information or harmful content, and you know, basically just potentially going against the interests of human flourishing, such as, you know, use for automated weapons, or perhaps more prosaically surveillance advertising. And our hunch is that non-human living beings are equally likely to be harmfully affected as human beings are. Now, it has been suggested that AI could significantly benefit animals. So machine learning might be used to try to make better sense of animal communication. And we've also just heard about the promise of AI in terms of animal welfare on farms, but there's been less attention paid to the ways in which AI could harm animals. And although there's been just a few papers recently, including a couple co-authored notably by Peter Singer. So we're seeking to contribute to this debate. And of course, we know that technology historically has caused both benefits and harms to animals. So if we think about the way in which farm machinery might have relieved beasts of burden of some of the harms, but on the other hand, if we think about something like the Chicago stockyards, then that basically intensified factory-style animal production, causing massive harms for billions of animals, and essentially enabling certain animals to be treated as cogs in an industrial machine. So what we do in our paper is propose a systematic broad church account of how AI does and might harm animals. And our concern is with the impact of AI on individual animals and their particular relationships with their social groups and their habitat, as well as with their humans. So we're not just concerned with species conversation, although of course impacts on species will harm individual animals and their social groups. And we suggest that concern is warranted as a corrective against anthropocentrism, because individual animals do have their own interests and concerns worth consideration, and also because human and non-human animal flourishing are related to each other. But we're not tying our framework to any one particular ethical theory, or, you know, making any particular principles or policy statements about how or why animals matter and how their interests should be balanced. So this is really just about raising questions rather than proposing any particular solutions. And we accept that a wide range of harms could potentially be relevant, ranging from basic health and negative experiences of pain and distress, through to unsatisfied desires to go outside, perhaps, or perhaps not, death, social harms such as loss of a mate, or even loss of culture of a group of animals in a particular place. And we also consider the possibility that animals might have an interest in their own privacy in some sense. And we're particularly interested in representational harms through AI, that is, harms that stem from how we as humans think of non-human animals, and therefore form the foundation of how we create our own societies and economies to relate to or use or abuse animals. Our framework considers both intentional and unintentional harms from AI to non-human animals, and also direct and indirect harms. And so what it does is it reminds us that the use of AI to intentionally harm animals in ways which are currently considered illegal or antisocial would really only be one category of how we might see harms to animals. There might be many other important ways in which AI harms animals, by significantly amplifying harms that are currently legal or socially accepted, such as factory farming, as well as those that are unintentional and especially indirect. And in particular, I know I'm so interested in the overall shape, or what I call the moral economy, of in whose interests AI is developed, and whether that's likely to lead to AI technology being developed in a way that is takes into account particular interests and values that are either harmful or beneficial to non-human animals. So we developed the framework on the basis of the literature, and then we basically sort of tested the framework by looking for examples of these sort of harms in the literature on AI, and with particular regard to the AI-enabled technologies that I mentioned before, so precision agriculture, wildlife conservation, automated vehicles and robots, algorithmic recommender systems, and companion animals in the Internet of Things. And so I'm just going to briefly talk to each of the categories, and Deborah, just tell me if I run out of time. So firstly, thinking about intentional, so of course, the most obvious is AI that might be intentionally designed and used to harm animals in ways that are illegal or antisocial. And we know that a major use of the dark web is actually the illegal trade of wildlife, exotic species. And so we might expect that these traders would also be very interested in other AI that could help them to track down target animals for that trade. But I think it's more interesting to start thinking about some of the other impacts beyond some of these really obvious ones. So we might think about AI that's been designed for some other purpose being intentionally abused by badly motivated actors. So there's been examples where poachers or illegal wildlife traders have tried to hack into wildlife conservation monitoring and drones in order to steal the animals, essentially. There's also been an example where wildlife conservationists were tracking great white sharks, and then the government, the state government, I would argue, illegally then misused that data to kill the sharks that were supposedly being conserved. We might also think about the harm that could occur through microchipped animals being part of Internet of Things in the home, meaning making it easier for domestic violence perpetrators to track down companion animals and their humans. And we know that they already use microchips to help them do that and then harm the humans and their animals. We also expect AI technology to amplify harm to animals from existing practices that are legal or socially acceptable, because essentially the scale and speed and promises of efficiency and greater control that come from AI technologies in things like precision farming and also in traditional conservation, which may not value all animals. In terms of unintentional harms, we find that unexpected direct harms from AI. So this is where the AI technologies might code in prejudice or ignorance about certain animals, and I think Emily sort of partly referred to this kind of issue. But we found, so self-driving cars are coded to avoid certain things, but Volvo found when they trialled their self-driving cars in Australia, they'd forgotten about kangaroos and how they're different to European animals. But we also know that people won't code in for the car to swerve to avoid a smaller animal because it's not going to harm the car or the occupants. We also, there's also a beautiful example of delivery drones, which failed to account for the fact that they're actually flying into bird habitat. And so the ravens didn't really like the delivery drones doing that. So that's ignorance or prejudice. But also these black box or opaque systems can start acting autonomously and promoting harm in a way that was unintentional for those who created, or arguably unintentional for those who created the system. So we might expect algorithmic recommender systems to start promoting harmful content to animals. Again, there is a big market on the internet for animal cruelty of various kinds. And so we suspect that algorithmic recommender systems may well end up promoting it, because we know they often promote violence or conflict and so on. So those are direct unintentional harms. In terms of indirect unintentional harms, there's an increasing literature, which I'm also working on the material footprint of AI and digital technologies. So things like energy use, which of course contributes to climate change and to harming the environment, which means destroying habitat. So that's one dimension of indirect harm from AI. But I think we're particularly interested in the way that epistemic harms may be amplified by AI. So within precision livestock farming, we see impoverished, what we would argue is an impoverished view of animal welfare. So that biometric data is privileged, but perhaps not other dimensions that are relevant to the interests of the animals in those systems. There's been, Peter Singer was a co-author on a study which showed that in fact, when you use Imagenet and WordNet and do searches on them, they already have coded in bias against certain species. So certain animals will have very negative words or meat-eating words associated with them, whereas others will have lovely words associated with them.
Time to wrap up, Christine.
Great, that's good. Thank you. And that brings me to my last point, which was this the final issue of foregone benefits, or as I said at the beginning, what I like to think of as the moral economy of AI development. So while AI might have potential benefits for non-human animals, we expect those developments that favour commercial profit or existing biases to be developed, as opposed to those that are less profitable and perhaps more pro-animal, such as wildlife conservation for non-charismatic species, to give just one little binary. So thank you very much, and I'll stop my share.
Okay. Hi, my name's Meg, and I'm joined today by my robot dog, Ibo, who has fitted out with AI and unfortunately is also programmed to be very annoying. But in allowing it to express its agency, I'm going to let it bark throughout the talk. So just enjoy the entanglement between me and this dog, as it invariably will act up. And today, Ibo and I are talking about effective entanglements in kawaii engineering. Kawaii translates to roughly cute in English. Ibo is a Japanese robot. So today, a lot of the framing I'm using is from Japan, as one of my backgrounds is cute studies, specifically Japanese cute studies. So this project forms part of a broader ethnography that I'll be working on across the next couple of years that takes a thing ethnography approach, by which I mean that I treat objects as if they acquire perspective and agency through the data they collect, the stories they reveal, and the interventions they make in the lives of the people that use them. So both by treating Ibo as a social actor in its own right, and by working with people who use Ibo as a therapeutic aid, perhaps they have autism, are experiencing trauma, or other kinds of reasons they feel they can't trust humans. I'm exploring the attraction of the thingness of Ibo, with the idea that this forms a dialogue or mutual interaction between item or object and user. And this also is heavily inspired by the work of Zoe Sutton, who in Australia has done some really interesting things around animal rights, looking at ways to dislodge human privileges around the way that we treat animals, and is supported by other scholars in critical animal studies. So what is Ibo? So you can see Ibo is here with me. Ibo loosely translates to buddy, and this name sort of really speaks to a primary part of its design, which is to elicit social reactions in the user, and by doing so, encouraging the user to suspend disbelief and sort of play into the aliveness, inverted commas, of this dog. Ibo has gone through a range of iterations. I think it took the world by storm in 1999 as it surprised everybody and was sort of sold by the Japanese government as a form of soft power, as this idea that Japan was this technological nirvana, which in fact is actually very far from the truth. But it's seen a range of iterations, and this specific model came out in 2017. Progressively over time, Sony, in developing this robot, have moved away from models of technology that kind of plays into that technological morphology, such as the visor on the top of the dog's head and the boxy forms, and has pushed the genre to really look at contours and softness and sweetness in the robotics design. So the dog on the far end, the very round looking one, the macaron dog from 2001, I think particularly captures that push. So this is the latest model. It's an Ibo ERS 1000. It's fit out with a range of technologies. And at first glance, it might appear to be very toy-like, and that's intentional. So Sony very much plays into a genre of robotic design that uses toy product design and mechatronics, puppetry and animation to engage users. But don't be fooled by its seemingly vacuous appearance. It actually is very, very smart. It's got object recognition. It can recognize faces, heights, hazards, and more. It can recognize colors. It can recognize individual people. It comes running up to me on a regular basis once it sees me. It has directional hearing, which allows it to look around the room and detect where someone is talking to it and position its eyes so it follows you. It has a voice recognition to detect both English and Japanese voice commands without any training required. Touch sensors for inputs, and a range of secondary features that I think contribute to its therapeutic purposes, in particular for autistic people. It's repetitious movement, it's highly predictable, and also sensory feedback like the purr of its fan, as well as the kind of rubbery tail, which allows for secondary sympathetic movement, playing into puppetry techniques. It also has fitted into it a cloud, which isn't activated at the moment, but builds into this intelligence into almost like a hive mind of dogs, where it can actually map out your house, recognize where your front door is so it knows where to greet you, develop unique preferences for food, words, people, develop a personality, and like all dogs, keeps a diary of your daily progress, and it will actually photograph you and upload this to the cloud for your viewing pleasure. I'm very grateful I don't have that feature turned on, because I'm sure the photos would not be flattering. And this subscription plan is what gives this dog a sense of aliveness, and it does tend to lapse at the end of 3 years, and if you don't renew, this entire data cloud is wiped. Effectively, your dog dies. So if that's not a good way, incentive for people to resubscribe, I don't know what is. But yes, it's very limited to 2 locations where these dogs are sold, with Japan and America. So it's not turned on here with me in Australia, thank God. So today I have a bit of a strange question. Is Ibo a dog? Now, in many ways, I think, yes, in many ways, Ibo replicates many aspects of dogness. But in many ways, it's very much not a dog. As we were talking about before I started, it's not particularly warm, it's not particularly soft. But what I'm really interested in is the attitudes towards pets that are embedded through this robotic design, much like Yolanda Stranger's The Smart Wife, talking about gendered codes that are embedded into some humanoid robotic design. So one of the new thinkers in this area, Keiko Nishimura, who's just completed her PhD looking at Pepper, the humanoid robot, also is interested in exploring this idea of robots as characters. And she says, one of the most common thoughts associated with robotics is that humanoid and zoomorphic robots are mechanical copies of humans or animals. Therefore, it seems normal to evaluate the realism of the robot against the original. A real-life dog did not provide the seminal reference point for Ibo. Instead, their originals were the idea or character of a dog. So, you know, to a certain extent, this is very true in Japanese engineering. Of course, we do have a range of universities that are experimenting with highly realistic humanoid type robots. And I also want to recognize in, you know, at zoomorphic robotic design, particularly in America, there have been attempts to make highly realistic animals such as Tombot. As part of this genre, Paro is often mistaken to be a replica of a real seal. But this is in many ways not the case also, but that's another talk. So in what ways is Ibo not like a dog? I think one of the key things that I observed already is the kind of motion and movement that plays into this use of puppetry to create this sense of liveness. When I think of little fluffy dogs that are your pets, I think of Giacomo Balla's Down in the Middle of a Dog on a Leash to capture that kind of frenetic liveliness and kind of energy that comes into a dog's movement. Whereas in the case of Ibo, it's much more deliberate, demure, and very sort of posed movement to sort of perform for the viewers. I guess viewing pleasure isn't quite the right word, but for aesthetic purposes. Likewise, when it runs, it works in a very hobbled fashion, not at all like the bounce and flow of a dog running. And also this dog dances, waves, sings, and can do a variety of tricks that I would be a little bit afraid of if the dog actually turned around and started doing that. This is coming from a body of work in Japan that's largely been funded by the Japanese government from 2009 called Kansei Engineering. And this is engineering with the intention of evoking affective experiences to improve the lives of people and their everyday experiences. I think this is also described more broadly as the healing boom post-bubble economy. So for example, many of you might know of cat cafes in Japan as part of this system of trying to create effective experiences for the healing of individuals. So I would say in the case of cat cafes, often at the expense of the animal and not properly recognizing that animal's freedom or agency. Michiko Okura, in her book translated in 2019, Kawaii Engineering, speaks to how cuteness has this affective potential that allows us to really understand agencies in technologies as social actors, and also how cuteness can act as a reference point for authentic human communication and create an illusion of life. So very much Keiko and I, we think of robots as puppets. Think of Baby Yoda, except Baby Yoda's now got an AI inside it and can follow you everywhere, which is slightly alarming, but nonetheless, I think in the case of Ibo is a lot more enchanting. This type of approach to robotics is highly informed by a Japanese media known as the character, and this is where Is Ibo a Dog comes in. So the character basically translates the character, but it's not quite the same as we might think in other countries like we're living in right now. But think of Mickey Mouse or Hello Kitty, I guess. So it's a term used since the 1990s to refer to toys, games, and other derivative goods centralized around a particular figure. Often this figure is not embedded in a narrative, but exists narrative-free. This is to allow that character to exist in our respective lives separately and form our own relationships with us. For example, this eternal hellhole of many, many Hello Kitties you know, could populate everyone's bedrooms and have different experiences with Hello Kitty without detracting from the integrity of what Hello Kitty exactly is. Go and Lee described the character as an assemblage, collections of easily transferable visual and narrative codes, surfaces for the projection of fantasy and desire. Oops. Likewise, Christine Yano, a specialist in the character, specifically Sanrio, also talks about the emotive forces that coalesce around character objects, or she describes them as art objects, that allow us to construct identities, meanings, and active roles in embodying and constituting social relations. So in many ways, Ibo is not a dog, it's a character, it's a puppet, it's a more than human, more than dog social actor. that brings up specific experiences in us through its animation. However, through this experimentation in design comes specific ideas about dogness that I think in many ways are sort of extracted, digitized and datafied and translated into this dog-like form, which has been around for some time in character design in general. For example, we can consider Maruyama Oko's playing dogs. Maruyama Oko in the 1700s was the first Japanese artist to collaborate with European artists as well as Chinese artists to create these very rounded, social, cute-like figures. They were very, very much rejected by the art school at the time, but very, very much loved by popular consumers and displayed in their homes. Can I have my water, please? Thank you. Likewise, Hachiko is another popular figure in the Japanese popular cultural imagination. For those of you who have traveled to Japan, perhaps you've seen in Shibuya a range of dog-like mascot figures and a very famous statue at the station. Hachiko's character is based off the real Hachiko dog that was very loyal to its human companion and would wait for it at the station every day until one day its owner did not return. And this dog waited and waited and waited and eventually passed away. So in this sense, the loyalty of the dog is very much embedded into its cute design and what it actually means. There are also cute dog drones. This is Yukimaru, who is a mascot for a town in the Nara prefecture and is said to walk in the sky by means of drone power. It has no purpose other than to be a mascot or diplomatic figure to kind of express or evoke this town's idea of kind of dreaminess, and as well speaks to a mythological dog-like figure. So on this note, so in many ways, Ibo is not a dog, but in many ways, Ibo has a lot of dog-like features that I think speak to how we view pets, and I think is very important to consider in the future of pet design. In many ways, I think it does actually perpetuate systemic practice of violence in which social animals are enslaved and biologically manipulated, resulting in their objectification, subordination, and oppression, sadly, even though it's cute. To start with, it's aesthetically pleasing. Now, I know this dog is not going to be to everyone's taste, but it does abide by kawaii principles: large eyes, rounded forms, highly sociable, like the painting I just demonstrated. But in many ways, it experiences the same health issues that emerge from selective breeding practices. For example, its back legs have a tendency to actually break off. This is as a product of them trying to push the design's form and sort of re-establish and affirm the sort of elegant back leg that we see in a lot of designer dogs these days. They are also loyal and codependent. They will follow you around everywhere. Their interaction does not exist outside of its interaction with you. It sort of reaffirms this idea that you're very much needed and are very much loved by this dog. For example, Kubo Akinori in his ethnographic work of users observed many times that Ibo would get stuck in corners and cry, evoking this caregiving behavior in users to come and rescue the dog. So it requires a high degree of attention to be an owner of an Ibo.
It's about time to wrap up.
Yep. And so in final, I think agency is also a key issue for this dog. So it does elicit naughtiness through its behaviors, but only through its capacity to entertain. And so as you can see, this topic is brimming with different ideas that I can't possibly fit in 15 minutes. And so if you've got any questions about Ibo or you want to talk to Ibo, you're very welcome to send us an email or a tweet. Here is our details. And I look very much to talking about animal rights through robots with you in question time. Thank you, Christine.
There we go. All good?
Yeah, all good.
All righty. And Meg's put Ibo away because I don't want the little robot snapping at my heels when I'm trying to concentrate here.
Fair enough.
So it's been shut away. So yes, as Christine says, this year I wrote a book called The Internet of Animals, and it's due out next March. You can actually go onto the Polity Books website and you can see the blurb there and even pre-order it, I think, already. And I'm just actually going through the copy-edited manuscript this week as well. So it's all in production. And so what I want to talk about today in the 15 minutes I have is just some of the key concepts. Obviously, I can't cover everything because you know, it's a book, it's a short book though, it's 50,000 words, but still I do try and cover a lot of ground in the book. So here's the cover. And I guess one thing to say there too is I had to, when discussing the cover with my publishers, I constantly fought back with them actually about the cute animal, because the obvious, you know, when people think about the internet of animals, and when I use that term, I meant the internet of animals, but also the internet and animals. So it's very, very inclusive of all the sort of digital media and devices that we use across every kind of animal these days, from wildlife to companion animals to farm animals. They're all covered in the book. And when discussing the cover with the publishers, they wanted your standard cute dog or cat, you know, staring at a computer and all that kind of thing. And I said, look, that's been done to death. Also, I really want to show the power of animals. I don't want the cutification of animals to be on the cover. I want kind of the you know, the power and vibrancies of animals to really come out on the cover. And I actually found this image myself, and I'm really proud of it, because unfortunately they accepted it and were happy with it, because it really does encapsulate a lot of the sort of effective forces and vitalities and vibrancies that I discuss in the book. So the book brings together lots of my interests, past and kind of current and future interests. So internet studies, surveillance studies, critical data studies, more than human theory, digital sociology, sociology of food, sociology of the family, sociology of health, sociology of futures, and sociology of animals, all coming together in the book. There is a chapter where here we go, here's the chapters. Chapter 2, I do cover all the major theoretical perspectives that I'm drawing on in the book, with that, you know, that background that I just discussed coming together and synthesizing it and showing how I'm building on those topics and areas of interest, a lot of which I've published previous books on as well. So I'm sort of seeing this book as a trajectory and going away from the human-centric focus that I have had in most of my previous work to looking at other animals. So yes, chapter 2, conceptualizing humans, animals, and human-animal relations. Chapter 3 looks at animal enthusiasts, activism, and politics in digital media. So looking at things like the vegan movement, the anti-animal cruelty movement, organizations such as PETA, PETA, and how they use digital media and websites and GIFs and memes to really push the message forward about their sort of anti-cruelty and animal rights platforms. Then chapter 4, the quantified animal and data valence. So that's very much drawing on my work on the quantified human self that I've published a lot on in the past, and also on the ways that digital media and devices are used to datafy humans, and now applying that to animals. Again, I look at a whole range of animals there. I do look at wildlife. I do look, so the sort of sensors and drones that are used to quantify and datafy both wildlife and farm animals, but also companion animals, because of course there are more and more devices around now for pets for them, like collars and so on, that can be worn to monitor and measure their movements and their sleeping and feeding activities. And actually what I say in that chapter as well, I sort of draw an analogy there between how we use apps and wearables to monitor our human infants, as we're often doing that now with companion animals, as in a very similar way, because we're thinking now about companion animals as our fur babies. And that's often a term that's used a lot to sell these kinds of devices in relation to companion animals. Then I have a chapter on animal cuteness, therapy, and celebrity online. So that is where I do bring in animals like Grumpy, the famous Grumpy cat there, doing its thing. I mean, really interesting to think about ethically is that Grumpy cat and several other animals that have got a lot of media attention and celebrity are actually disabled animals, and their unusual appearance is because they were born with a disability. So that's something to consider, I think, ethically. But something that I really talk a lot about throughout the book too is the way that animals are used more and more as therapy objects. Whether it's zoomorphic care animals like Paro, the seal, used in aged care, for example, or the sort of furry robots that are used, the dog-like furry robots that are also used for therapy with different age groups, from children up to older people. But also your petting zoo, for example. We're seeing more and more that animals are used just to provide, you know, emotional support and comfort to humans. And I think there's a lot of ethical issues to think about there, particularly as in the context of the book, you know, how these therapeutic uses of animals are datafied and digitized. Then chapter 6 looks at animal avatars and zoomorphic robots. So that's where I do focus on how cuteness cultures, and very much I do relate that to Japanese kawaii culture that Meg was just talking about as well, because of course that a lot of the kind of cultural concepts of cuteness in zoomorphic robots do come principally out of Japan. But also animal avatars in games. So more and more, like for example, that bottom image there, you know, the smartphone app where mostly children are encouraged to engage with, it's a bit of a Tamagotchi idea, to care for animals or to groom them or play with them or decorate them, do makeovers on them and so on. But also the types of online games where there's often violence against animals. You kill animals, they're part of your resources to be used as part of the game, for example. And then in conclusion, I think about reimagining human-animal relations. And something I do in the conclusion too is look at the way that arts-based representations of animals in the context of broader ecologies have been a really interesting digitized way of making humans become more attuned to our relationships with other living creatures. So I end on a hopeful note, I should say, and because I can see a way forward for how digital technologies might be used to better care for the environment, including animals, but also other living creatures. So what I say in the book is the ways in which animals are portrayed, monitored and cared for by humans using digital media and devices have significant implications for how humans and animals will live together in the near future. So human and animal health and well-being, environmental sustainability and activism, industries related to digital technology development, animal care, animal protection, food production and consumption, smart homes and cities. They're all part of the Internet of Animals and becoming more and more entangled and intertwined in terms of our relationships with animals and how we care for them and how we don't care for them, how we treat them as objects, how we use them as therapy, how we cutify them. All those things come into play across these major themes in the book. And key issues examined include the ever-expanding impulse towards anthropomorphizing animals. So more and more of this, you know, we love to see, you know, the grumpy cat is just such a great example of how we anthropomorphize animals. We see them as displaying and sort of chiming in with human affects, with human facial expressions and moods and feelings. And this is very common in GIFs and memes. The rise and impact of cuteness cultures, I think, are really having a lot to, as I say, across games, across robots, lots of different ways that we represent animals in GIFs and memes again. The move towards positioning animals as therapeutic objects I've talked about, the growing interest globally in and concern about the health of the natural environment and other living things. So that is something that I do discuss throughout the book. But also something that I identified as I looked across the different digital devices and technologies that I discuss in the book is a counter discourse that represents animals and nature as a dangerous other. That's always that sort of binary opposition that we've had, you know, basically for a very long time now, particularly since the Enlightenment and scientific ways of thinking and this positioning of, you know, other animals as other to ourselves and as, you know, as humans as being superior to other animals. That's something that I really spend a lot of time looking at, and how digital devices and media contribute to that or can potentially undermine that way of thinking. So questions addressed, yes, and I have got the cute cat there staring at the computer. How are human-animal relationships changing and how are digital media and devices contributing to this change? What do humans and other animals lose and gain when animals are digitized and datafied? What are the implications for both human and animal health and well-being, and at a larger scale for planetary health? And these are kind of theoretical concepts that I draw on throughout the book, concepts of entanglement, kinship, relational connections between us and other living creatures and place and space in the world. And these are some of the key books or sets of books that I've been really engaging with and drawing on in this book. Here's just a few memes that I made just to encapsulate some of the key arguments. So we have cuteness making people want to protect animals, but cuteness objectifying and demeaning animals, which draws a bit on what Meg has just said, that cuteness can be a two-edged sword, because there's questions there about the dignity of animals and how we always want to sort of see them as babies, even if they're adult animals, and wanting to have that cuteness affect going on with a range of lots of different animals, particularly furry ones. I actually start the book talking about this account called Cats Being Weird Little Guys, which is really popular on Twitter and also on Instagram. As you can see, it's got 1.7 million followers on Twitter, very popular. And I just start the book by just looking at that discourse, cats being weird little guys. There's a whole lot going on in that title of that account. Being weird, okay, they're amusing, you know, we find their animal-like behavior amusing and gives us a laugh. Little guys, you know, anthropomorphic discussion of them as, you know, guys, but as little guys. So that sort of cuteness thing coming in as well, along with the weirdness. And this is just a quote from the book. So digital feline images and humans' responses to them online are suffused with ambivalent emotional forces, enchantment and amusement, but also hints of contempt and aggression, sometimes bordering on cruelty. And I see a lot of that in these kinds of accounts. And I have to say that, you know, I'm not positioning myself as outside these affects and forces. I love a cute cat or dog or any other kind of cute animal as much as anyone else. I do have a cat at home, you know, but I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, I'm implicating myself, but also saying, what does it mean for every other human when we cutify animals, when we see them as a therapy object, when we laugh at them, being in sometimes very difficult situations? What does that say about us and our relationships with animals? Something else I say in the book is that we do continue to very much distinguish between, you know, lovable and cute animals and those that we don't find lovable or that we find pests in some way. So this is, I mean, nature is scary, especially pests and bugs, but I love nature, especially furry animals. There's very much that binary still going on when we look at the way that animals are digitized and datafied and surveilled and monitored and all cutified or not cutified or seen as important and precious or seen as disposable, as something we eat, that we engage in factory farming, that we kill without a care, how some animals, especially the furry ones, are worthy of protection, how other animals such as, you know, pests, animals we see as pests, you know, insects, snakes, as Gavin mentioned earlier, and other reptiles, head lice, mosquitoes, all those animals we consider as pests to humans, we tend not to be quite so sentimental about, and we tend not to cutify. So I find that a lot of the animal ethics discourse does tend to talk mostly about the furry, warm-blooded animals. So even though a term in animal ethics is speciesism, I'm saying, well, sometimes it can be a bit speciesist. What about the non-vertebrates? We often don't hear about slugs and snails and squashy things, and as I say, like lice and worms that live inside people's bodies. Inside, you know, there seems to be not that much concern about their rights. And also sentient-ist. So there's a lot of talk in animal ethics about animal sentience. And, you know, I find that quite anthropomorphic because it does sort of make a comparison between how so-called intelligent or sentient, aware of the world some animals are, and how that should be used as a way to sort of weigh up to what extent they should be given rights. And just finally, I'm going to talk about, because I know my time's up, almost up, I talk about this project in the book. So I did do an online survey back in 2021, and I used some of the, it was an open-ended, mostly open-ended. People had text boxes that they could type in some answers, because it seemed to me, and I think there still is the case, there hasn't been a lot of research on how actually people are using the internet to share information about animals, to find information, to amuse themselves, to find therapy. So I did do an online survey with 130 participants, and and these are just some of the results. There's my timer, so I've just got one more slide. So people who answered were very keen internet users or app users to upload and share information about their pets or any other animals. They did tend to look at animal-related content for entertainment purposes. That was a very strong reason they looked at animal content. Quite a few of them, a bit under half, did use content for dietary, political, activism purposes. 40% do follow social media influencers, and 16% said that they use smartphone apps or wearable devices or any other smart device to better understand or care for their pet or any other animal. And finally, I thought this is in my conclusion, this actually in my conclusion chapter, because this was really interesting. I had this future-oriented question at the very end. If you could design a new technology to help you better understand or care for your pet or any other animals, what would it be? Please describe what it would do. And what I found is really interesting in that people really want to better understand the animals they engage with. Again, often it's their companion pets that they're talking about, but not always. Sometimes it is wildlife, not so much farm animals. They really want digital tech that helps them understand the feelings of animals, to interpret if they're well, to get some sense of their well-being so that they can care for them. So I find that quite poignant because, as I say in the book, there's a lot of in the networks of data, apps, social media, and smart technologies that comprise the Internet of Animals. Animals are both highly visible and invisible. Their rights, needs, and welfare largely ignored, and that's what we just see constantly. The objectification of animals through digital media and devices, through all the different media and devices that I examine in the book. Thanks very much.
So thank you first, Christine and Deborah, for having me here today. I'm really delighted to be able to participate, even though it's a bit early and I haven't been able to see everything. And I'm also delighted to be able to present just after like this really fascinating presentation by Deborah Lupton, because I'm guessing that it will echo some of the things I will share with you right now. Just to have like just a quick presentation. So yes, I'm at Sorbonne. I'm a PhD at Sorbonne University and at National Museum of Natural History in Paris. And I'm mostly coming from media studies, but working a lot with more than human geographies. I'm part of the Digital Ecologies research group, and some of my fellows and colleagues will present just after me. So like it will be as well like a way to engage on this question. And I'm mostly interested in the relationship between moving cameras and more than human life. And so today I would like to introduce you to one of the cases that actually really interested me a few years ago about co-privacy and Google AI. So to start, on 13 September 2016, Guardian journalist David Shariat-Madari shared a Google Studio image accompanied by the caption, "Great to see Google takes co-privacy seriously." This picture has been taken by Google Street View in August 2015 at Cove Fen, Cambridge, England, where cows are known for roaming freely. On the picture, one of the cows has been blurred by Google AI, as if the cow was human. Once shared, the picture of the anonymous cow has been widely circulated, from retweet to Web Gazette brief, to a BBC article and other features in the UK national media, often with a humoristic note. Why the blurring of this cow provoked so many cow jokes and media covers? And what can we learn from human and non-human digital entanglements and data policies from this case? The reactions to the cow's blurred face point to an area, to me, where something different from Google's usual social interaction is at play. As an identifying sign, the erasure of the human gaze in Google Street View is one of the conditions for the massive photographic recording of worldviews. In addition to the reduction of identity to a single distinctive sign, the politics of the gaze of Google Street View teaches us in several ways about what can be seen and what cannot, what is the object of modesty and what is exposed to the public eye. So based on a digital ethnography of the cow of Cambridge affair and of more than human encounters in Google Street View imagery from 2007 to 2021, this presentation aims to explicit the perceptive coexistences involved in the making of visibility policies of algorithmic images. Okay, so co-privacy at play. Yep. So non-human in Google's landscape are often blurred by Google's algorithms that hesitate. It means that they identify a gaze, but without distinguishing whether that gaze is to be blurred or not. Deities and their pastices, such as Buddha, animals and others non-humans find themselves subject to a random regime of anonymization, a phenomenon that lends itself to various forms of reaction, as in the case of a Cambridge co appearing without its snout blurred on Google Street View. So this is the famous co. So while recorded in August 2015, this co became famous only in September 2016, after this picture has been shared on Twitter by thousands of people. The media coverage of the Cambridge co is a signifying non-human-human encounter in the context of Google Street View's project. First of all, what I've noticed is that the surprise is linked to the subjective function of blurring, which paradoxically gives the cause an identity. So you can see on this slide the different covers of the tabloids, of online tabloids. So you have The Sun, for example, utterly absurd Google Street View cause face in hilarious, utterly absurd Google Street View blurs cause face in hilarious privacy mix-up. Because what is at play here is that the blur suddenly renders the co visible while masking its face. Google blurred this co's face, and now people have many questions, titles Bored Panda. Basically, Google doesn't want you to know the identity of this co. What secrets is it hiding? Questions the Daily Dot. I like how the illustration cover of the Daily Dot represents co-anonymity and identity. You have like this dark shape, like masking the co sides, but you have still the number on a ear showing that is as well part of an industrial process. So here you have like a double game on the question of identity, anonymity, and identity. Anyway, so what I noticed in all these covers and all this remediation of this case is that from hilarity to a moment of local glory, the case is surprising, giving rise to numerous puns called co jokes. It's blurry because the co was moving. What's their beef with co pictures? Playing on the legal values of blurring and the difference in treatment between the two co's, some ask, what are you hiding, co? And others to conclude, you never know who's the government informant these days. Google even add, we thought you were pulling the other one when we heard the moves, but it's clear that our automatic face blurring technology has been a little overzealous. Of course, we don't begrudge this co milking its 5 minutes of fame. So what I can notice is that the iconic blurred co is still online on Google Street View, and the popularity of the animal and the absurdity of this scene lie at the crossroad of the popular value of the co figure and the irony that this excessive blurring underlines of platform capitalism. For once, privacy of data policies is excessively respected. How people responded to the Twitter post and pictures is also interesting. Most of the comments you can now see on the slide are parents, more precisely co-jokes. The said animal is either male or female, a she, a it, a he, a beef, a bullock, a cow, depending on the joke and cultural views that are projected on the black and white animal. This might be related to what Marisol de la Cadena describes as co-forming, the capacity of cows to form, transform, alter territories. Hence, the animal body hosts the different gazes that shapes its value and function in extended geographies. We even have a male gaze that eats meat, that say, I don't want to eat a burger from some coast like I saw walking the streets. Or again, like there is one you can't really see because of the screen, but basically, like I don't notice cow face, but I know that ass, for example. That said, it's a cow that basically seemed human. As reported by the BBC on 15 September 2016, the animal was snapped by Google's cameras at Cofen and seemingly given the same treatment humans receive for privacy reasons. The same treatment humans receive for privacy reasons. So let's focus quickly on this now. The second reason of astonishment is related to the perception of machine error absorbed under the identity of Google in most of the papers. The algorithmic error is mocked as well on the basis of the editorial intention that drives it. It is interpreted and judged to be an overly meticulous application of privacy. This popular interpretation invisibilizes both the legal frameworks that regulate Google Street View and the technical protocols of machine learning. Because the functioning of the software detection algorithm is based on the cross-references of data evaluated according to a scoring system that you can see now, for example, with all the percentages, a scoring system based on an analogical principle. Identification is calculated on the probability of resemblance between patterns. This aspect is rarely mentioned in the articles that reported on the Cambridge Co case. However, the success rate of identification by the algorithm of Google is 89% for faces and 94 to 96 for license plates. The rest of the identification are mostly corrected by the users. Indeed, in machine perception world, the identified data constitute events in the machine's perceptual space, which become the basis for an action. A road sign is a potential source of information extraction, and eyes are a thing to be blurred. And these data extraction machines are composed of convolution neural networks, CNN. These artificial neural networks, inspired by the biological processes of visual perception, emulate the brain in order to pre-process information. And they work on an inductive principle. They learn from experience and need large, high-quality data sets for training. The amount of data processed during trainings allows the result of machine learning to move from probability to certainty, gradually reducing the gap between prediction and the ground truth. And this ground truth is, in fact, according to Louise Amoore, a ground truth of data. The truth of the algorithm is only based on the data set it processes, she says. I quote her, "It is not recognizing a cat, but a cat at this angle, that angle in a tree or upside down. There is no sense of catness, just enough cats in places that there can be a pattern of what a cat is. The algorithm is indifferent to the attributes of the cat or the attributes of the cow as qualities or essence. By relying on the truth of the data, the algorithm does not need to have a truth about the essence of catness or felinity. In this, the doubt and uncertainty of the algorithm is relegated to the dataset on which it is based and weighted. In our case, the AI has no truth about the essence of cowness. The narratives associate the tool with the brand. Google cares about cow's privacy, for example, which limits the consideration of technical mediations in the organization of our environments by normalizing the act, while at the same time disengaging from the question of Google's responsibility and ethics in the development of these new collective norms. To quickly end on what I would like to underline in this presentation, I would like to speak about the perceptive coexistences in themselves. How do these differentiate, how do these differ, okay, let's give up on this word. How these different masking practices reveal Google's involvement in collective and individual processes of subjectification. These cases of erroneous masking indicate the specificity of the processes by which identity and subjectivity are granted or alienated from one another. In the media regime of Street View, for the man to have an identity, he needs his face, and the cow needs a mask to have one. This means that the image of beings in Google Street View is permanently shaped by discourses and operations that play with identities. Google's photographic recordings are kept for 6 months, actually. They are somewhere, and somewhere the unblurred images of individuals exist and are subject to a set of treatments and operations independently of the agreement of those whose faces were captured. The indexical slicing of images is the support of Google's predictive economy. And based on anticipating the behavior of others, the predictive logic belongs to the practices of surveillance. The permanent watch of users adds a scrutinizing eyes, always on the lookout for what is happening in the visible world of Google. And in this respect, the images of Google Street View have something to do with the image of surveillance. It is an image that the surveyed miss. This image from Google Street View shows a man and a cat at their respective windows, watching a Google Street View car passing by. Neither face is blurred, revealing their gaze. What is different in the nature of the cat and the man's gaze towards the passing cat? And what does this image tell us about Google's gaze? This image brings together three gazes, three perceptions that meet. This meeting space puts in tension the algorithmic machine gaze based on an analogical relation, the same, the human gaze based on a mirror relation, the representation, and the non-human animal gaze based on an immediate relation, the event. The Street View camera is anything but a gaze. It is a capture that is never given back. Facing the gaze of the Google Street View camera, the non-human animal gaze opens a breach in the system. Unlike the human gaze that seems to address Google as a socio-technical entity, the gaze of non-human animals towards Google's recording devices does not have a representational purpose. While some passers-by signal with the prospect of being on Google, like some passers-by want to be on Google Street View website, it can be assumed that the non-human animals that stare at the camera do not stare with this intention. Non-human animals are said to have a different power of response as absolute otherness. Non-human gazes suspend in this perspective the symbolic functioning of Google by shifting attention to the instant material presence of the recording device. Three gazes expose Google by making its technological infrastructure visible. These gazes, expose Google by making its technological infrastructure visible. They shift the focus to the regime of the event and its detection, from which everything can be reconfigured. At the threshold of experience, the conviviality of a given subjective gaze appears with the non-human animal. If we go back to the cow in Cambridge, a few meters away, the Cambridge cow is surrounded by others, all unmasked. And when we turn around, the cow is free of the pixel mask. It was basically just a temporary blind spot. Thank you for listening.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for having us here, and it's been great to see the other papers. Sorry, I only got to make it from the break onwards. I'm in the same time zone as Pauline, so it's quite early here, but it's been a really nice way to start the day. What me and Johnny are going to present today is our work on peregrine falcons and webcams, and our kind of notion of techno-natural history, which we can get to. And I'll really just quickly say that we're going to talk. I'll introduce the background to the project and kind of its foundations, and then discuss peregrine falcons and their specific ecological context, before talking about the technological context of webcam technologies, nest cams, the ones that are in peregrine nests, and then talk about the qualitative research we've been doing over the last 2 years with people who watch these nest cams and why we think they're important. And that I'll pass on to Johnny to do that. So yeah, this is a bit of background. What we're presenting today is about half of it is from material that we published in Transactions of the Institute of British Geographers, this paper here, the digital peregrine, and the second half on the kind of epistemic practices is a more STS paper that we're writing around the epistemological potentials of nest cams and how they fundamentally change the way peregrines come to be known. Sorry, I'm doing this quite quickly, but I hope it's all right. We're trying to get a picture of who was using these peregrine webcams and for what purposes, asking what the ecological and social implications are of this digital mediation. And to do this, we interviewed 15 leading figures in the UK peregrine conservation, all of whom had a really close relationship to the webcams and who'd been kind of installing them and using them for a variety of purposes. So this included conservationists and scientists. And yeah, we're going to draw upon some of the quotes and these materials in this presentation. But this only really gave us like one half of the picture, and something we were really interested in was the people watching these nest cams and why they kept on going back to, I guess, search for these digital encounters with peregrines. So we had a lot of the nest cams share our survey online, and we got quite a lot of responses there. So we really had tried to gauge why people were watching these, as well as why they were being set up. And then we also combined this with some other methods, largely following these discourses online. And the peregrines are kind of like an interesting case, we thought, because they're in conservation, you very rarely get success stories, and peregrines are somewhat of a conservation success story in the UK. By 1964, for example, over 80% of the peregrine population in the UK had been lost, which had been affected by industrial agricultural pesticide use that had led to egg thinning, you know, the kind of thing Rachel Carson was writing about in Silent Spring. And yeah, so Clive, who worked in the peregrine conservation at that time, described the population as going down to 300 during the pesticide era, and it's slowly come back. That's due to these pesticides being withdrawn, laws being tightened, and public awareness increased, and the legal protection of peregrines as a Schedule 1 bird under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which basically means they can't be touched or tampered with. Sorry, is that moving? Yeah. And once the pesticides had been banned and their environments had been protected, peregrines started to recover their historical ranges. But what happened that we found very interesting is that when the peregrine bounced back, it came back differently and stronger. And by the late 90s, they were being seen in cities for the first time ever. And Clive told us about this time that they were spreading to urban environments, to tall buildings like cathedrals or the occasional chimney in the industrial north. Cities offered a huge untapped food resource and safer nest sites, increasingly being improved by humans wanting to look after them or get into these places. So in addition to the height that was given by these urban buildings, the reason that many peregrines were found nesting on cathedrals as well, particularly in city centres, was that they emulated the sandstone of traditional nest sites on coastal cliffs. And the specific allure of peregrines ties into the cultural status they achieved in the UK as charismatic species worthy of fascination. Here's Cambridge's female on one of the college roofs. And a leading peregrine ecologist, Nigel, noted that this comeback story plays into the contemporary success of peregrine conservation, noting a lot of people in the older generation remember how rare they became in Britain. So there's this sense that the peregrine is a very special bird culturally. And this, combined with the allure of the animal itself, too, kind of ties into this idea of this fascination at the heart of why humans were seeking out these interactions. This historical context really has this ability to, what Nigel says, captivate people. But what we found very interesting here is that when peregrines started to move into cities, people started getting very excited and wanted to help them nest. So people started putting up these custom-built nest boxes to encourage the peregrines to nest. There was a real excitement about this time in the late 90s, early 2000s, and people really wanted to see how peregrines were adapting to urban environments for the first time in Britain and to monitor their success. And what you see in this tower block here is a place called Sussex Heights, which is the only tower block in Brighton on the south coast of England. And this was the first nest cam to include a webcam. And here's images from the webcam in 2000. That went up in 2000. And I don't know how many people remember webcams at that period, but they were very kind of crude technologies that were grainy images that would refresh a single JPEG every minute or every 30 seconds, depending on bandwidths. And this was all very much dependent on the urban context in which these nest cams were set up. The infrastructures that were afforded by cities allowed, buildings were already connected to the internet, and all that was needed was a few meters of cable. So these urban infrastructures of communication really afforded a novel closeness to the peregrines. People could contact or encounter peregrines much more easily. But it's been the last 3 or 4 years where these nest cams have really taken off. We found that they've increased. There's more than 100 in Britain now, whereas in 2011 there was 8. And it's now whenever there's a sight of a peregrine, there's an inkling for these technologies to go up with them. And the technologies have improved so much that now you have HD cameras and these kind of pan, tilt, zoom cameras that can be remotely controlled, and also ones with HD audio and infrared filming, so we can see things at night. And they're often set up like this, which we found very interesting, with a camera looking down, kind of gazing into the very personal lives of the peregrines, and a broader camera offering this perspective that would often like situate the peregrines in their milieu, which we found in our research that a lot of people were coming to look at these peregrines based on their urban setting rather than just the bird itself. And you know, these things have really kind of changed. Now they've changed the way that people engage peregrines, because you know now people can watch peregrines all around the country in real time. So, and people who, what we also found very interesting is scientists using these as well. Nigel, who uses the camera for scientific studies, said that he'd gone from being quite cynical about web cameras to actually being a sort of champion of them, because I think we've got much better quality cameras now. Yeah, so they're really being used by a whole range of actors to understand peregrines and improve their conservation. So we had these questions coming into it that were kind of like, why do certain humans seek out these digital encounters? What are the knowledge implications for how the peregrine is known, and how the digital peregrine is co-produced by this kind of complex assemblage of humans, non-humans, and technologies? And how might this help us repurpose natural history as a process of observation for the digital age? I'll pass on to Johnny to talk through some of those implications.
Thank you, Adam, and hello, everyone. I'm just going to, are you going to keep your screen sharing, Adam, and I'll just continue?
Yeah.
Or do you want me to share mine? Okay.
No, I can do this.
Yeah, leave on, that's good. I just wanted to say, if you look at the chat, Mia has sent a link to a live stream peregrine nest cam. You should have a look. It's a really nice one. It seems to be in Melbourne. It's raining. You can see the peregrine sitting. It's a nice accompaniment if you want to see what it actually looks like and attune to some of the kind of things that we've been attuning to for the last few years. So, okay, where are we? Here we go. So, one of the first reasons that we noticed people were watching the nest cams from the research was for entertainment. So where the peregrines acted as these protagonists in a sort of non-human Truman show, as people became attached to following the daily lives of individual animals. But why peregrines and not other birds of prey, which seem to capture the public imaginaries, like kestrels, for example? For Nigel, one of our participants, this was because they were good at following the script in front of their digital audiences. Peregrines are unlike any other bird of prey. They're very reliable. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to see them on the church they're using. They're very predictable. Another participant, Clive, compared checking in on nest cams to slow TV and test cricket, saying that webcams just sort of make it all a bit closer to people who just want to watch something. Test cricket's a good reference that probably only the British and Australian audiences will get. Another important reason for the nest cams that kept on coming up in our research was surveillance, keeping the birds safe from persecution, which they still receive a lot in the form of egg collectors or pigeon racers who kill them. Kevin thought this was a way of crowdsourcing surveillors. He said, having the webcams and building up a following makes the peregrines secure. It's this hiding in plain sight idea. So the more people knowing about peregrines, the more people fighting for their protection. One of our participants said, I've always thought, get the information out there and people will look out for them. With webcams, you've got the ability for the public to take part in doing a lot of the watching for you. The final reason we realized that people were watching these peregrines were for observing and monitoring the intimate lives of them for the purpose of knowledge production. Nigel made it clear that nest cams were agential in a paradigm shift concerning the ways peregrines are understood. They've shown us things we'd never have known, like that males incubate eggs or that they hunt at night. He said that up until 20 years ago, what we knew about peregrines really was from rocky, craggy nesting peregrines that were often seen through a telescope. Whereas now, you know, we've got these insights into their lives, into their intimate lives. This wasn't just allowing researchers to know more about specific birds, but also allowing them to know specifically more birds at once. Clive said, within 20 minutes, I could look into 20 different peregrines' nests. It's fascinating what is happening. It's not stuff you can get from the books, but we are learning just now. Stuart defined himself as an armchair scientist, And another participant said that people watching the nest cams can observe the minutiae of the behavior of the birds, ways in which the male and female interact. Particularly, people couldn't have a close look at this in the past before the webcams came into being. Nest cams are thus advancing, challenging, and rewriting ecological knowledges concerning peregrine falcons. Nest cams afford access to what several of our interviewees termed the minutiae of peregrine lives. Whilst perhaps it seems obvious to note that this involves making observations at finer scales than has been previously possible, it's the broader implications of the views afforded by nest cams that we find interesting. To understand peregrine ecologies, ecologists often collect the remains of prey that drop from nests, and then they sift through them to see what peregrine diets are composed of. In doing so, they can get a sense of peregrines' territories, as the presence of certain rural prey species might suggest that peregrines are nesting in cities, but hunting across wider areas that span the urban-rural divide. Sometimes peregrines are spotted by different nest cams in parts of the UK very far from each other, again providing insights into peregrines' territories. Nest cams are revealing much more about peregrine diets. Researchers are able to get a sense of everything that they're bringing in, catching and eating to a degree not possible using traditional methods of field observation. One participant told us that particular night birds like water rails and certain ducks have white breasts that are illuminated from below by streetlights when flying over urban areas at night. The phenomenon is potentially allowing peregrines to expand their hunting hours into the night, a practice which is particular to urban peregrines and not seen amongst their rural counterparts. Aside from offering novel understandings of peregrine ecologies, nest cams are also providing insights into local ecologies more generally. In the words of one researcher, peregrines just know how to catch different species, so they give a more complete insight into what's out there. In this sense, we might think of peregrines as sort of non-human research assistants in coming to know urban ecologies. Next slide, please. The final thing I'm going to discuss in relation to research is the tension held in place between digital methods and more traditional methods of observation. As they've improved, nest cams have come to form a larger and more important part of the epistemological toolkit of biologists and ecologists concerned with a range of raptors and other animals. Nest cams can't totally replace traditional field methods for a number of reasons. One of our participants told us, "I would much rather sit on the bench outside Boots in the middle of Wakefield." Boots is a pharmacy, dealing with the drunks and the homeless people who come up to ask questions about the peregrines. Watching what happens from the ground level, because it's more exciting for me. I can see intruding peregrines coming. If the female starts calling in a particular way, it means there's an intruder coming. For Stuart, cameras are all very well, and I love my technology and that, but there's something nice to actually see birds in action. You will never say, for instance, on camera a bird, a peregrine, take a pigeon, but you will if you go and visit them, and that sounds a bit macabre to say, but it is a spectacular natural sight to see a peregrine hunting a pigeon. The experience of fieldwork is an enjoyable, sometimes thrilling one for many researchers, pointing to the embodied nature of producing scientific knowledge. That's not to say that nest cam knowledge is not embodied, but obviously in person affords a wider range of different affects. There's other benefits from conducting in-person research as well. Especially for peregrine enthusiasts who are interested in engaging broad publics with urban wildlife. A number of people even would often come up confused or to ridicule one of our participants, Kevin, in Norwich, due to what he was wearing in kind of these urban environments, outdoor gear with binoculars and stuff like this. But when they came up, they would often quickly change their opinion. So due to they would change their opinion and be able to engage with Kevin, who ran these viewing stations in the middle of Norwich City, where he would have handheld telescopes and binoculars alongside the nest cams in order to create this kind of dual image of the peregrine. But as Finn on Jurgensen argues, webcams may redirect people away from seeking in-person encounters with certain wild animals, which is good when these encounters can be harmful for people and animals. As our participant told us, people who don't like peregrines are focusing their attention on nest boxes and writing the occasional grumbling letter or email to the cathedral. So the webcams do a good service in this way. They distract these people from peregrines in rural areas, for instance.
About time to wrap up.
Yeah. So to tell the stories of certain species, we must tell the stories of technologies they're entangled with. And this is kind of where we've come to put this idea of the techno-natural history together, which offers a detailed and descriptive form of ecology and ethology together. It offers a form of immersive and qualitative inquiry rather than being detached and quantitative. And these kind of NESCAMs, when we look at them through a techno-natural history perspective, allow us to put emphasis on both material and effective relations between humans, non-humans, and environments. So yeah, so just some brief concluding thoughts, and we can, yeah, happy to wrap up here. That's everything.